Travel back to 1930s Poland to take in the beautiful sights, fine dining, cultured clothing, and, oh yeah, the invading German army! We're talking about Land of War, the beginning.
Fresh out the oven.
The list of games set during World War II is massive. You got real-time strategy games, turn-based tactics games, and of course, plenty of first-person shooters. The setting reached the height of its popularity in the early 2000s, with titans such as Medal of Honor and Call of Duty chewing up the market. But as the years have gone on, the general populace has gotten rather tired of shooting Nazis. After having explored almost every front, nook, and cranny of the war, time and time again, there's little new the setting can offer, but that didn't stop Polish developer MS Games from trying. Modern titles trying to recapture that World War II golden age have been very hit or miss. Titles such as Enemy Front and even Call of Duty itself just haven't been able to replicate whatever it was that fascinated players with the setting. And in my opinion, thinking it's just the setting itself is part of the problem. What made Medal of Honor and the original Call of Duty games as good as they were came down to solid shooting mechanics and a formula of large set pieces and multiple gameplay styles. The problem with this formula is while it's easy to see and follow, it's not easy to actually do, and especially if you're a small, untested developer releasing their first game onto the market. Land of War is unfortunately one of those cases. What it does to stand out from the World War II games of old is superficial to how the game goes about doing it. Being set at the start of the war and following the German invasion of Poland, the game already sets itself apart somewhat, as that's not really part of the war that gets that much tension these days. So it's nice to get a different perspective of the happenings before most of Europe got involved. The main problem is trying to focus on that fact, which is rather difficult due to this level of production. Land of War does okay in these departments, creating some nice looking locations as long as you don't look at them too closely. Voice work, on the other hand, is a massive letdown. It's fairly obvious that the cast is made up of whoever the devs could find, as line delivery leaves a lot to be desired. The main player character is probably the best of the bunch, but even at that, there's still a good amount of awkwardness. Pretty much everyone seems to only know English as a second language, and aren't all that great at it as a whole. This causes some odd pronunciation problems, such as the classic of saying quit whining as quit winning.
Quit winning. It could always be worse.
But it does surprisingly add a level of authenticity to the characters. I mean, they're supposed to be Polish as it is. It would be strange if they spoke perfect English without any accent or anything. I almost wish the devs had gone full force and just had them speak in their native language with English subtitles, as that could possibly have helped bring a more natural delivery to their lines, or at least hide any strangeness from an ugly American such as myself. This wouldn't, however, fix everything. Animations would still be stiff, lip-syncing would still be off, and the fact that none of your allies really care about you shooting the living crap out of them while they stand still and talk would still be weird.
Any questions?
Land of War has this overall jank to it that it's unable to escape even in narrative-focused settings. It heavily follows the Call of Duty formula of set pieces and the like, but lacks the execution these things really need to make you really care about them. Movement is mostly fine, even though I sometimes get caught up on things in the environment, and shooting works well enough for what it is, even though it does fail to feel all that impactful. The main problem is the level design and, of course, bugs. Level design follows the trend of so many Medal of Honor and Call of Duty wannabes by being little more than hallways with crates in them, sometimes literally when dealing with trench warfare. Here, there's no such thing as alternate paths, and even though the game is extremely linear, it still feels necessary to have waypoints telling you where to go. A lot of these paths are kind of idiotic as well. At one point, I had to go through a barn in a village and open the door on the other side in order to leave it. The barn was full of junk and all but the middle path, and opening the doors led you straight into an ambush. There's no cover or any way around the ambush, as I had to open the door in order to progress. The only course of action was to play the open animation, run back the way I came, and hope I made it to cover before being murderized. This kind of thing happens multiple times throughout the entire campaign, where players just have to run through an area and hope they don't die. What makes this worse is the incorporation of out-of-bounds areas. While there are plenty of invisible walls to block your path, Land of War doesn't always want to come up with something to get in the player's way. Instead, it makes liberal use of areas where if you enter it, a short countdown will begin telling you to get back to the battlefield or something along those lines. Refusing to do so will cause players to die for no real reason and send you back to whatever the last checkpoint was. While other games such as the Battlefield series have used this method for a long time, it's never been one anyone really likes, especially when it comes paired with extremely restrictive level design like it is here. Land of War also takes a crack at the loathsome turret section, but thankfully there's really only one instance where you're forced to do it. One of the main problems with sections of a level where you're told to use some kind of stationary weapon to deal with enemies is the fact that these rarely have a way to avoid taking damage. Some titles will allow you to duck behind the gun for cover, but a majority of games don't, which only leads to more cheap deaths. The one time players will find themselves having to do this is using machine gun on the back of a truck while plowing through an enemy camp. A sequence that is not as entertaining as it sounds and a bit buggy with vehicles still chasing you even if they've lost their drivers. Outside of that, anytime you're asked to use a weapon in placement, there's nothing to stop you from just not using that weapon and shooting dudes with your normal guns. This lets you move around and actively use cover instead of having to stay still out in the open and just take what's being thrown at you, be it bullets or a freaking airplane. At one point early on, you're told to use an anti-aircraft gun to deal with an aerial assault, but the planes tend to aim for you specifically, and have a nasty habit where their wreckage after you kill them will fall on you, killing you instantaneously. Deciding not to use the anti-aircraft gun and just shooting them with a rifle is the only way to dodge falling wreckage and stay alive. I'm honestly perfectly fine with this, even though it doesn't seem intentional by the devs, since it gives players more opportunities to use the game's arsenal, which is one of the more interesting parts of the entire thing. Unlike most World War II shooters, outside of the basic German soldier weaponry, the guns you get to use throughout the game are rather unique and rarely seen in games. Some liberties may have been taken with how available some of these weapons actually were, such as this rather enjoyable to use revolving shotgun. But this is a video game we're talking about, and I can let a little historical inaccuracy slide. The annoying thing about the more unique weapons is that they tend to be on the Polish side of the conflict, and you spend the entire game shooting Germans. This means that battlefields are littered with German weaponry and ammo that you can pick up and use for yourself, whereas the Polish weapons tend to be in the hands of your fellow soldiers who are still alive. You're mostly going to have to rely on finding ammo stockpiles in order to keep any gun juice in your Polish weapons, and thankfully they are rather plentiful, but it's still kind of annoying to have to run around and try to find one if you happen to be in a section where there's none obviously available. Other than shooting guns, Land of War also offers some vehicle-focused sections, which range from kind of neat to a real pain in the butt to deal with. There's the previously mentioned turret section on the back of a truck, but also a part where you control an armored train, drive a little tank thing, and even fly a plane. While each of these sound interesting and or fun to do, they all have some really bad downsides. Actually trying to hit anything with the guns of the armored train feels almost completely random, made worse by how slow their fire rate is. There's almost no way to fire the thing accurately unless zoomed in and controlling one of the guns individually, which leaves the rest of the guns open to attack and being destroyed. To be honest, that's kind of a good thing, as the less guns there are, the less you gotta multitask between them and can instead focus on shooting stuff with the ones that are left. The little tank thing you get to drive later on, called a tankette, is actually pretty fun to use. I love driving this thing until I realized that not only will I have to deal with multiple full-grown tanks with it, but there's no way to repair it. So you're going to have to take the least amount of damage possible in every single encounter, or else you'll quickly find yourself going back to the last checkpoint over and over and over again. Flying a plane, on the other hand, has these problems as well, but without being enjoyable to control. Trying to dogfight and fire upon ground targets in a game that isn't built around doing so leads to a lot of flying in circles and crashing into the ground when just trying to actively hit something. While all of these vehicle sections do help give the game some variety, in the end, they mostly end up harming the game overall by being annoying to play in a multitude of different ways. On the top of all of that, Land of War is also a very buggy title. Sometimes objectives won't activate, so you'll just be stuck in an area of a level without being able to progress. This happened to me at least twice for 2 different levels. One where I was able to just run past the objective without needing to do it and not being allowed to go back and complete it, so I had to restart the entire level, which was great! The other time I had to defend an area for a specific amount of time, only for the time to never end and enemies never stop spawning. There's also a lot of visual oddities at times and general awkwardness to just about everything, even the animations for just walking around. Overall, while Land of War: The Beginning brings some much needed neat ideas to the World War II FPS, its devs just seem to have bitten off more than they can chew in their attempts to copy the big boys of the genre.
Yep, that's a fair point.
What they really needed to do was strip back their scope, focus on basic gameplay over set pieces and graphics, then polish everything up as well as they can. As it sits, the game has a lot of problems that can make it a chore to get through, making it not really something people will find worth their time outside of pure curiosity. To make things a bit worse, while the devs made an initial effort to improve the game through updates and patches after it released, these seems to have petered out over time and been replaced with weapons that can be bought as DLC. Weapons like the Nagant revolver, Thompson, and even a freaking sword are hidden behind an extra paywall. While some of these weapons being on this part of the war may not be all that historically accurate, it would make more sense to have them as hidden unlocks or something like that than DLC. Who's gonna buy these, let alone for $2.99 a pop? The game does have a collectible defined in the form of comic book pages scattered around, but the comic itself doesn't really have a whole lot to it to be worth specifically going out of your way to look for. If you're a fan of World War II shooters and want to experience a different perspective of the war, while being someone who can handle some jank and bugs here and there, then Land of War: The Beginning can still offer you some interest. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you think of the game or this video in the comments section. I'm MegapieMan, and I'll talk to you guys later. Want to see more of my stuff? Click on the video on the right for Pumpkin Jack, a 3D platformer that looks like it might be a Halloween game at first glance, but also might just have been a Christmas game all along.
Quit winning.